This video is a discussion I had with Josh, a game programmer, on the performance and stuttering issues with Unreal Engine 5.
Hi, I'm Josh. I'm a programmer. I use Unreal Engine and Unity, mainly Unreal Engine though.
So, we need to discuss a very common problem that specifically PC players have been having for a few years now since the release of Unreal Engine 5, and that is the constant stuttering problems when playing Unreal 5 games.
Yup.
Have you had any experience with the problem at all yourself, or anything like that?
I've had so many issues with it. As a poor PC owner, I don't have the best PC, and obviously I need to make games. And transitioning from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5, it has been a challenge.
You're saying it's still like you're affected by the same performance struggles, even making the games in engine. It's not just a problem for players then.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so it's still a problem for developers and players. So just using Unreal Engine 5 at all to render anything seems to be causing some level of performance problems as a whole. So it could be looked at whether Unreal Engine 5 has some deeper problems that are causing these performance issues. Unreal 5 has a lot more technical capabilities compared to previous versions of the engine. I've also seen lots of advantages in real-time lighting with features like Lumen. And then we also have Nanite being used to automatically create sort of like LODs for models. So all of these things could be, causing a performance impact. They're all things that have to run in the background, all things using up your resources. So do we think the stutter problem could be down to Unreal Engine 5's sort of new and unique features?
Definitely. They're really good features on paper, but in engine, they seem to be quite poorly optimized. And it can have a huge effect on literally the game making process and playing the game.
So, of course, another question with new features, especially with Lumen. Obviously, before we had real time lighting, global illuminations, real time ray tracing. Before we had the hardware for that kind of thing, most game lighting was using what's called baked lighting. So you put lights in a scene, and then you essentially run a program within Unreal that would bake the lighting onto the texture, so it would sort of be faked, so nothing was having to be calculated in real time. Of course, this was bad for stuff like day-night cycles because shadows wouldn't move a lot of the time since they were pre-calculated at only one time a day. I know one example that was quite good for showing that is in Xenoblade Chronicles X. That had a day-night system, but the shadows on the ground would just be static because they didn't have the power on the Wii U. Amazing system.
Yeah.
They didn't have the power on that to run real-time lighting, but obviously Lumen provides that advantage. But is it a big enough advantage when you consider it could still look good enough with baked lighting, and then you might not have a performance hit?
Yeah, well, it obviously depends on the style of your game, depending whether it can keep to those limitations. But obviously you want your game to be optimized, so sometimes you will have to make that choice for your game.
Yeah, so obviously we've had experience working in Unreal Engine 5, and when putting together environments in the engine, there have been times where it's been worth checking to see whether we can get good results even once we disable Lumen, because even if you do work in Unreal 5, you don't have to use Lumen. You can disable it, go back to the older systems, and see if you can get good results. So we have played about with that a little bit, and it seems it's sort of, it depends on the complexity of the scene you're working on how big of a difference it would make to performance. Um, Obviously, as long as you bake all the lights properly and turn off all forms of real time light rendering, then you shouldn't have any sort of performance penalty on lighting. So a lot of players are saying that they're looking at older games made in Unreal Engine 4, even Unreal Engine 3, even proprietary engines from like the 2010s, and saying that the lighting in those games actually look better than games using Lumen in Unreal 5. So if it's causing a performance hit and the games look worse, why are we using it?
Exactly.
It plays into a bit of a problem recently with Unreal Engine 5 is sort of being used to like advertise games. It's being used as a selling point, whereas in previous generations, gamers wouldn't really be aware of the engine used to make their games. A lot of it would be proprietary. They wouldn't even have a name publicly. The engines wouldn't be known. But now all of a sudden with Unreal Engine 5, there's almost this pressure for teams to be using it because that's the best engine in the eyes of the player, and that's what they want to be playing games made in. But could this be causing too much pressure on developers that might not understand the engine, might not know it, might not be able to optimize for it, and they would get better results using a proprietary engine or a different publicly available engine like Unity? Um, they could have better results in those engines because they might understand them better. I mean, Josh, you do programming. I don't know if on your side it makes much difference on optimizing code on whether you use one engine over another.
No, it's mainly down to programming language, really. But back to that point you said about the pressure on the game developers with the new engines and stuff. I've definitely seen that around. Recently, Dead by Daylight, they moved to Unreal Engine 5, and on social media and stuff, there's been a lot of talk of people complaining about models and the look of the game, just purely for the reason that it is on Unreal Engine 5, because they're like, well, you're on such a good engine now, you should be able to have all these great visuals and stuff, and that puts a lot of pressure on the of the game. So I think that is definitely an issue. Where before they wouldn't even care what engine you're on.
Yeah, there's almost like this expectation with players that just because a game is using Unreal Engine 5, it needs to be the most high poly, photorealistic, realistic lighting effects. It has to be the top end of realism just because it's using Unreal Engine 5 when you could have had those same results really in any engine, and it more comes down to how well made models are from the artists, how well your lighting designers do on placing lights in a scene, and again how well programmers do at optimizing code, keeping the performance down at that end, and whatever other engine features you can use in different engines because they all have their own
Definitely.
advantages, disadvantages.
I think a thing that caused a large boost in this area was the Matrix demo on the PlayStation. Because when that came out, that was a showcase for Unreal Engine 5, and that was publicly available to all gamers. And I think that really got the word out that these are the capabilities of the game. Whereas that was a very small, like that could not really be a game, and people are expecting games to come out to this like fidelity, and that's just realistically not possible at this time.
Yeah, we still don't sort of have the hardware for what people are expecting out of Unreal Engine 5 to some extent. I think one thing that definitely didn't help was sort of all at once in the industry, you had quite a lot of changes going on with development. You had Unreal Engine 5 coming out after years of Unreal 4. You had real time ray tracing now being available with NVIDIA's RTX graphics cards coming out, and obviously AMD's equivalent. And then, of course, you had the PS5 and Xbox Series S and X, which supported these new graphical capabilities like real time ray tracing, even though they sort of weren't really made for it. Because if you look at the consoles trying to run these kinds of games with these graphical features, it's not really working out great from the sense that games are having to drop back to lower resolutions, 1080p native or even down to 720p being upscaled with FSR or PlayStation's new PSSR. Um, so it's like a reliance now on upscaling technology because they want to include these new features that all came about at the same time because they could then use them to advertise their consoles. And then, of course, it all gets linked back to pressure on the developers to actually use the features.
Definitely.
So I think it was just a bit too much all at once, and now we've ended up in a situation where we've got current gen consoles that only sort of work with ray tracing, real time lighting effects, and only sort of have the power for the best of Unreal Engine 5. And then, of course, Unreal Engine 5 being new at the time the consoles came out. And it all sort of hit at once, and it ended up with Unreal Engine 5 being used as like a selling point for the new systems, for new graphics cards. We can run Unreal 5 games at their best. It put the engine at the forefront of players' minds. So now it's a big thing for when you think about making a game. Do we want to make it in Unreal 5 just because then we can advertise it's made in Unreal 5 and it has the best graphics?
Definitely. And it puts a lot of stress on them too, like choosing, do I use Unreal Engine 5 for the people? And do I like take the time away from development to teach myself the skills to be able to use all these new features?
Yeah, of course, because every new feature in Unreal is something that you have to learn, even if you are familiar with Unreal as a whole. But then you've also got people that previously would have specialized in, especially in AAA companies, proprietary engines that are only used by that company. And then also
Yeah,
there'll be people that would specialize in Unity, and all of them are sort of trying to make the push over to Unreal 5 to sort of use it as that selling point. When by all accounts they're probably going to have worse results, both in how well the game looks, how well the game plays, and how well it's optimized. So of course, with a lot of the blame being on Unreal Engine 5's new rendering features, stuff like Lumen and Nanite, taking up resources and maybe not being the best optimized for. Um, it would make a good example to compare having the same scene in Unreal Engine 4 and Unreal Engine 5 to see the penalty just by switching to the newer engine. So I'll put up some footage on screen now of when I tried that the other day, and I just used one of the basic sample maps from Unreal Engine 4, and when I uncap the frame rate, this is still running in editor, same resolution on both, same graphical settings on both running at Epic, and it's running on a RTX 4070 mobile GPU, just on my laptop. And as you can see, on Unreal Engine 4, we were getting high 400s and the FPS, close to 500 FPS. Whereas Unreal 5, it is cracking over 100. We are getting the triple digits, but it's a bit of an extreme example just to show that performance difference between Unreal 4 and Unreal 5. That's almost, Unreal 5 is almost only getting a quarter of the performance of Unreal 4 in the same scene. Because I haven't adjusted anything for this. This is just a default scene setup in Unreal, so the default settings are probably all the same. So Lumen will likely be enabled, and it will be taking advantage of Unreal 5's new rendering features just by using the engine.
of course, for people like you with 4070s, this doesn't really seem like a huge issue. But me personally, I'm on a 1060 Super, and I can tell you now, it makes a huge difference. Projects that we've worked on, you've had like hundreds of frames, and I've been on 10 to 15 frames a second. It's been unworkable for me,
Yeah,
and that
just to
can
get
really
that.
limit.
Yeah, just to get that Unreal 5 to work, you're sort of. I don't fully remember what the minimum recommendations for Unreal 5 are, but I was going to say you're probably definitely on the low end of what is recommended for Unreal 5. And
100%.
it definitely leads to, as I've seen with situations where you've had to even like remote into my system just to get something done, because Unreal 5, the editor, and even games, you're having to run on the lowest settings just to get 15, 20 FPS. And that's even when we have used stuff like baked lighting. So there are definitely some deeper problems with Unreal 5. Um, and definitely running Unreal 5 games and the editor on older hardware is definitely not a good thing. But even when you look at the newer hardware, even like sort of your mid-range GPUs, even now, like with me having a 4070 in my system, and even with like the 5070, but I don't know, the 5060 is a thing, but that sort of general range of graphics cards, they're still facing issues once you crank up the visual settings all the way, once you higher the resolution, and it's again another thing where on finished games that are being released, there's almost sort of this expectation to rely on upscaling technology to smooth out the performance problems from either a lack of optimization or, you know, issues with the engine. Yeah, so a lot of players sort of recently have accused a lot of development companies of being lazy when it comes to optimizing, because they want to rely on AI upscaling technology to sort of be the optimizer. So you can get better performance running the game at a low resolution, so they don't have to optimize it to run properly at higher resolutions like 4K. Instead, you just run it lower, run it through an AI tool, get some extra frame gen, some upscale frames, whatever you want, and there's no performance problem.
Personally, I've not experienced DLSSR, but
Do you think it's fair to say that, you know, some developers are using, you know, the AI upscaling technology to be a bit lazy on optimization?
I don't even know because I've not read much on like on that subject.
Yeah, I guess if you're not really keeping up to it because you can't run it yourself,
Yeah.
but that's probably part of it. But yeah, I think you could definitely say that it laziness and using AI upscaling and even other AI technologies to, you know, sort of blast through development processes. It is probably happening in some studios. Um, we haven't actually made a game yet that's included any sort of features take advantage of any AI, whether that's upscaling or anything. We haven't sort of touched on that from a development point as of yet.
Even when developing, I don't think I'd opt in for AI upscaling completely. I think
You
if I
rather
got my
take time
game,
to optimize enough so it can stay at native.
yeah,
Yeah, right. Well, it's sort of it sort of depends on different areas of the game, because obviously upscaling is going to make a bit of a bigger difference to uh, artists compared to programming. Considering the upscaling is optimizing obviously what's on screen, all the art, the models, and the final. Well, it's upscaling the final rendered image, but it could definitely let you get away with doing things like keeping Lumen on, cranking all your real time lighting settings to their highest in Unreal, and then just saying, well, we don't have to worry about performance because we can just run the game at 480p internally and use DLSS to upscale it. And if you can't run DLSS, well, get a better computer. Is that sort of an attitude that we could imagine happening within the industry in some places?
definitely.
Yeah. So of course, the whole conversation these days surrounding Unreal 5 comes back to the stuttering problems. Since even on your highest end hardware, even with the 5090 these days, 4090s, there are people still running into stuttering issues, not being able to run the game on Epic settings. What could be potential solutions to this stuttering problem? I think one of the most common ones we've seen so far is shader pre-compilation. So you'll open a game for the first time and it'll sort of be on a loading screen for even upwards of an hour, just pre-compiling shaders, going around the whole game world, loading every visual effect in the background and compiling a shader for it.
Yeah, see, I don't think this is a great solution. I remember my first experience with playing Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I know it's not Unreal Engine, but it's a good example of compiling the shaders before the game. I had to wait a good 4-5 hours purely just for shader compilation because I don't have that highest end PC. But 4 to 5 hours just to even get into the main menu, that is real for games.
When you sort of look at different kinds of games being made these days, and obviously you've got your AAA games with your photorealistic visuals, and they are most likely taking advantage of Unreal Engine 5 and its new features to the max. But then you do also have your indie games that are using more unique art styles and probably don't need everything that Unreal has to offer. So, in that respect, there are a lot of indie developers now opting to revert back to Unreal Engine 4, um, simply because their art style works better. I know I've had some experience with it, is using certain types of shaders, especially if you want like toon shaders, cell shading effect. Um, that can actually provide quite the performance penalty, adding that effect into Unreal Engine 5's render pipeline. Um, because obviously the new engine is trying to implement all its new features also on top of that pipeline. Whereas you load that into Unreal Engine 4, there's sort of less going on. It's less crowded, so it's less resource intensive, and you can have just a nice looking art style without having to worry about the performance in the same way.
Yeah, so I've definitely seen loads of examples of this online in social media. Lots of developers have been talking about how they're still using Unreal Engine um, purely because of how much better optimized it is and how like their games can run a lot better, which I think is a real huge point that Epic Games needs to fix in their Unreal Engine 5. Because if developers are still using your old software, something is going wrong.
So do you think part of the blame for these performance problems and the stutter issue is on Epic Games and how they are choosing to develop the engine?
I think so, yeah. I think they're becoming victim of their own scope creep in their engine. I always see these news headlines. Oh, new feature in Unreal Engine 5. You can do all this, you can do all that. But
Yeah, of course they've been
if they're adding
adding.
all these new features, like when are they optimizing? Like it's cool you can do this, but can you do it well?
Yeah, of course there's been more pushes. Every version of Unreal Engine 5 coming out has some big new feature. Like, I know in recent years we've had, being able to make animations better directly in Unreal, being able to model directly in Unreal. Of course, MetaHumans and the MetaHuman creator is now built into the editor, and they're sort of just adding all these new features. Are they ever taking a step back to just say, right, we'll just make a solid release of the engine that is better optimized for different kinds of PC hardware? Because again, it seems to be doing a well enough job optimizing like final game builds for consoles. But that could be more down on development kits produced by Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo on that front, and also developers being able to optimize for one piece of hardware. So, should it be that Epic focuses on looking at the engine at a deeper level on how it can be better optimized for PC specifically. Like, I know one example is could there be some built-in features in Unreal 5 to take better advantage of newer features in Windows 11? Stuff like, best example I can think of that's come out for gaming recently is direct storage, which speeds up read times from SSDs to get a closer effect to something like what's on the PS5, where it can load much quicker.
I think Unreal Engine is starting to forget what they are. They are a game engine, and it's great that they're focusing on, like, well, not focusing, but adding all these different things like modeling, animations, all the engine, becoming an entire game development platform. But they are a free to use platform, and not most of their developers are going to be indie developers and stuff. But they're not exactly tailoring the experience to indie developers. They're focusing more AAA big companies that know how to optimize all their stuff, do all of these things that can fix or not or help the issues in their game engine. But they need to take a step back and optimize and make it a bit more indie friendly, in my opinion.
Yeah, because of course you always got the question of AAA companies are going to be using proprietary engines, even with Unreal Engine 5 sort of being a selling point at the minute. There are still a lot of AAA's using their own engines, and they do have a better idea than and the resources to optimize better for whatever engine they choose to use. But of course, the issues are still there in AAA games, but it could be even worse in indies because they don't have the resources or even just the time or knowledge to optimize at a deeper level. They're not engine technicians, they're game developers, and there is a difference. Right, so I know another thing that's also been mentioned in the approach to the stutter problem, which, as it of course mainly comes down to shader compilation, and it's sort of like on the fly compiling of shaders that causes the stutter problems. And one area there where it's increased is, I know for a lot of games, if you have like a driver update, if you update your NVIDIA or AMD drivers, um, your shader cache gets basically wiped and you have to rebuild those shaders. So you could be playing a game, stuttering through it for the first time, but then it's fine for a while, okay? But then you update your graphics drivers, and then it's back to being a stuttering mess. So it's sort of been thought if the GPU manufacturers could do anything to either make the shader caches work over driver releases or have some sort of database of precompiled shaders for popular games for each of their graphics cards on each driver version, or the most recent driver version anyway. Because it could be sort of a big ask to do, of course, with all the different combinations of PCs you have, but you know, there's probably the likelihood that there is always at least one other person out in the world playing a popular game with the same configuration as you. Especially when you look at people playing on like gaming laptops that are pre-configured or pre-built desktops. You know, these could be prime places to do like they do on consoles and share pre-compiled shaders between players. So no one really has the stuttering problem if you're playing on a more common system configuration.
Definitely.
It just sort of depends whether that's even something capable to be doing. Again, I'm not someone that works in the deep ends of software development and graphics pipelines, so you know, I don't know if that sort of thing is possible. I know it's being discussed. I know even when you look at like the Steam Deck, for example, even though that's technically a PC platform using PC hardware, just in a handheld format, and it runs a desktop operating system. It runs SteamOS, which is based on Arch Linux, and when you download a game from Steam on the Steam Deck, it can download precompiled shaders with it, which avoids the shader compilation stutter problem on the Steam Deck, because all it means is one other person with a Steam Deck has to play the game to compile the shaders, and then it's uploaded to Valve's database. But of course, it can't always be in the hands of, game developers, GPU manufacturers, the engine developers. It can't always be in the hands of that. Shader compilation is just an unfortunate thing that sort of just has to happen, especially again on PCs where it's a lot of different hardware. So it is, I said, what can players do about the problem if they really want to play a game? It's made in Unreal 5. It's known to have the stuttering problem on PC. What can they do to have the best experience playing the game? And I think the number one thing that could sort of be recommended at the moment is, if you don't mind playing with a controller, play it on console, play it on the PS5 or Xbox Series X, because then you don't have those problems.
That's definitely true. As a PC gamer, I find myself playing larger games like GTA or Hogwarts Legacy on my console purely so that it can run smoothly.
Yeah, so I got a good one that he points out there is Hogwarts Legacy is made in Unreal Engine 5. So that is a good example of Unreal having the shader stuff problem. I remember when that specific game, Hogwarts Legacy, when it first came out, I got it on PC first. At the time, I was running a desktop with an RTX 3070, so it was sort of mid-range for that generation. The 30 series was, I think, still the latest at that time, so it wasn't really outdated in any way. But I remember loading up Hogwarts Legacy, even on low, medium settings, it was practically unplayable, especially when you got to, what was the village called? Hogsmeade.
Yeah.
When you got to there, it was just a mess of stuttering. And you could get decent frame rates in between. But I know with that game specifically, it definitely had the shader compilation problems when you'd get to a new area or see something new for the first time. It would stutter. But then I think the game still had deeper issues on PC, because even after going around the same areas, it wouldn't really smooth out, at least on that launch version. Whereas I then instead got the game on Xbox Series X, and it was a much, much better experience playing it on there. But again, back to it could be even deeper issues, again, with that game specifically. Even playing it on the Series X, there were still noticeable lag spikes, stutters, which was believed in the end to come down to loading of new assets and going between different parts of the open world, going between the Hogwarts castle and the grounds. It sort of had like a little loading transition on the doors, and then it would stutter as you just get through the doors while it's still loading the area. I know that isn't an issue at all, and never was an issue at all on the PS5, which of course has faster SSD read speeds when compared to the Xbox. So again, it could just be that high-performing hardware can mask these performance issues if the hardware is good enough, but I think it's probably unrealistic to expect that every player has the highest end hardware or the latest console.
As someone with a heavily, heavily, heavily outdated PC, I would love some consideration. Like, I loved it when Google came out with the Chrome OS. My poor people laptops could live again. I need an equivalent for shader compilation. Please.
You need an equivalent in like game engine and all
Please.
that stuff. You need an equivalent, like something that can run on the lower end.
An Unreal Engine Lite. that
Yeah,
is
yeah. Well, that could just be
that is
Unreal
what I
Engine 4.
need.
That worked fine.
Yeah, and there we go. That's why we have developers still using it.
Yeah, and that's sort of the whole issue here. It's, you know, why use Unreal Engine 5 if you don't specifically need the features? Because use Unreal Engine 5, your performance is just going to be shocking.
Exactly, it's a super niche market now.
Yeah.